Evening all. Um, Punchestown starts tomorrow, but we're looking ahead to day two of the festival here, looking at two races in particular. The 4:55, which is the 3 mile novice hurdle, and the 5:30, which is the Punchestown Gold Cup. Um, Two very good races, particularly the novice hurdle, which I think you could probably make a fair argument is the best event of the week in terms of depth and quality, even without Death Duty lining up here. I think it's a particularly good contest. Uh, Although ironically, it's the Gold Cup, which I think offers better betting opportunities. But yeah, two good races. So we'll start with the 4:55, the 3 mile novices hurdle. Again, usual rules apply. Spreadsheet here with horses, speed rating, official rating, price expressed as in decimal form and percentage terms, and then my prices. You'll see immediately that there's no green horse here. There's no horse I've found who is clear value. There are some horses who I think are marginally value at prices. Monalee in particular. I think if I were recommending a bet, it would be Monalee at the prices. But it would be fairly small stakes, and I think the market is pretty tight on this one now. I always enjoy the Final Furlong podcast, and they'd done this race in a bit more detail when the prices were a bit more generous. But now the market's the screw's been tightened a little bit. But it's worth taking a wee look at the race anyway. It's a fascinating race. So you've got the Albert Bartlett, the potato race form, being represented in both Penhill and Monalee, who were first and second that day. You also have the Pertemps final form being represented in Presenting Percy, as well as some other assorted pieces of form. I think it's important to say, first of all, that the market suggests that the front three have an 80% or a 4 and 5 chance of winning this. I actually think it's slightly higher than that, but I would broadly agree that the market's got it right, and that the most likely winner is pretty certain to come from one of the first three in the betting. Unusually, I thought the Albert Bartlett at Cheltenham was actually probably the best novices race on offer. Certainly stronger form than the mid-distance race, whose name I've forgotten, the Neptune, and probably stronger than the Supreme as well. In terms of ratings I've allocated, I rated Penhill 165 and Monalee 163 on my speed figures, which is significantly higher than what I'd awarded Lebaik in the Supreme and Willoughby Court in the Neptune. In terms of how the race was run that day, it was strongly run, not quite as strongly run as the World Hurdle the day before, but a strong run race. 235.19 between the first and three out, compared with 232.36 in the World Hurdle. And the other thing about that race was the eye-catching closing section from three out to the line below 100 seconds, compared to roughly 101 seconds in Arctic Fire's race, and same again in Defi de Soy's. So yeah, very good form from a time perspective. Penhill was probably slightly, I'm not going to say flattered, but he was certainly in the right position in that race, being held up, making his headway when he did. I think he's still the best horse in the race, but Monalee certainly did things the hard way. He also raced a bit keenly at times, which I have to say is slightly concerning here, because that's a strong pace and they're not going to go the same kind of gallop here at Punchestown that they went at Cheltenham. So you'd have to be a touch worried about his keenness. But that applies to Penhill as well, who up until a few starts ago was racing at 2 miles and went keen enough in the Albert Bartlett. Likewise, Presenting Percy is actually himself a strong traveller, and as is Album Photo, who I think is a horse of potential, but not for me either at the prices and in terms of the form and price time form that he's achieved thus far. Um, I think he was particularly keen last time as well, and I can't see him getting home. And even if he does, I think he's likely to be outclassed. Um, Presenting Percy, Pretempt's form was pretty strong this year. Um, Certainly the strongest we've seen for a few years in that race. If we look at the relative sectionals between the first and three out, 234.54 compared to 232.36 in the World Hurdle, 2 seconds slower, but between three out and the line, 100.73 compared with 101.16. And interestingly, Presenting Percy carried a weight 11.11 that was even greater than Nichols Canyon. So I've rated that form highly. I think he was probably a stone well in that day, and I've rated him 160, which would mean he is a little bit defined with Monalee and Penhill, but it's kind of within the margin of error. I think the three of them will be thereabouts come the finish. Um, if I were to recommend a bet, I think it would have to be Monalee at the prices. I think Monalee is certainly a more likely winner than Presenting Percy. Um, and I would say he's about a 9-4 chance, whereas the market top price available is 3-1. It's not the kind of race I would be going crazy in, because the front three are very closely matched. And again, the big risk with Punchestown is that end of season form can always fall up. Form from earlier in the season can often fall apart. I mean, you have to, horses like Penhill have been on the go for almost a year. And Presenting Percy and Monalee have been on the go for over 6 months. So yeah, Monalee I think is the bet at the prices, but only worth a small interest in what's a fascinating race. The kind of race you can watch and really enjoy and get plenty out of without ever having a bet. The slightly less interesting race in terms of the horses who line up, but an altogether more interesting betting heat is the Gold Cup. I think Sizing John's too short here, currently at 11-10. I'd be quite happy to price him up around 2-1 on my tissue. That's not to say I'd lay you a bet at 2-1, but I don't think he is a 50% chance of winning here. I think there are several interesting horses, and we'll go through them in a bit more detail. And I think the market's got Jacadam right. I think he's got a market best price is 100-30. I think that's pretty much spot on. He ran well at Cheltenham. He's coming for a little bit of criticism since. He travelled very strongly through the race. He jumped well through the race as well. And Ruby gave him a beautiful ride. He did make a mistake as well at a crucial time. I'd watching the race as he turned for home. I thought he was going to absolutely bolt up. And I think had he not made that mistake at the last, he would certainly have come no worse than second, and who knows, he maybe would have even challenged Sizing John. As you can see, he was 3.25 lengths behind Sizing John at the line, and I'm convinced that he lost around that kind of distance from the mistake he made two out. Whether he stays the Gold Cup trip is certainly questionable now, but this is a slightly easier trip, and he goes there with a live chance. Not one for me at the prices though. Horse I'm most interested in is Coneygree. Slightly weak in the market, but the Bradstocks treat this horse as their own personal pet. I think it's very safe to say that he wouldn't be going here unless everything was in his favour, unless all cylinders were firing. Um, he is risky. He's a fragile horse, but when he turns up, he always runs his race. Very tough horse, good jumper, good cruising speed. He's uncomplicated basically. And although the 15 lengths second behind Q Card in the Betfair Chase to the naked eye wouldn't appear to be the strongest form, from a time perspective, that form was absolutely brilliant. It was certainly the best chase performance of this year, or rather this season. Um, it was an absolutely brilliant performance by Q Card. He jumped brilliantly that day and just galloped them into submission. And I thought Coneygree ran a very big race that day. He'd been off for over a year. Again, he did everything right. He jumped, he travelled, and he just wasn't good enough. But 15 lengths second, and he kept on all the way to the line. I've rated that performance 168. I rated Q Card's performance that day at 180 plus. Um, and as you can see, in terms of speed ratings, I think only £3 or £4 separates the first four in the market. So I'd be more than happy to back Coneygree at 6-1. I think he should be much shorter than that. Um, and whether he wins or not is another story. But I think you'll get a good run for your money. Likewise, Outlander I think is slightly overpriced. He flopped at Cheltenham. Ignore that run. He's better than that. His penultimate start, beating Don Poli, was good form, kind of mid 160s form. And if he returns to that, you'd have to say that he would go very close. Um, I think wouldn't put you off having a bet. I don't think he's quite as good value as Coneygree is, but I wouldn't, I think between them they have an outstanding chance of winning, and 6-1 and 10-1 respectively are decent prices. Champagne West, probably I've priced him up as being around 13-1. Market has him 16-1. Again, I wouldn't put you off him, but he does have a little bit to find with the main protagonists, and again doesn't represent quite as much value as Coneygree and Outlander. So in terms of how I approach this race, I'll certainly be laying Sizing John, who I believe is too short. Um, just as a slight aside, I do have concerns over his ability at 3 miles. Now, that would seem like a crazy comment given he's won um, the Gold Cup. But a couple of things I'd note. One is that he is keen enough through his races. I mean, he's clearly spent much of his life looking at Duvan's arse over 2 miles. And both his last two starts, albeit in races that weren't overly strongly run, he was keen, maybe slightly inefficient through the race. Now, it didn't stop him winning, but you know, you always have to be slightly critical and slightly harsh on these horses when you're getting down to kind of even money. Um, and it wouldn't take much for him to do too much early in the race and not finish the race as well. And in terms of the raw form, this isn't a vintage year for staying chases the way things have worked out. And I don't think it would take a brilliant horse to beat him. And part of the reason I like Coneygree is because he is uncomplicated. He's very tough. He'll jump and he'll find for pressure. He's a hard bastard to get past. And Sizing John didn't have any horses like that at Cheltenham. Um, Jackadam, slightly weak finisher. Um, there were no horses there who are going to put it to Sizing John the way that Coneygree will here. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think Sizing John's probably best trip is ultimately 2.5 miles. But he has managed to get away with um, extended 3 mile trips because of its a particularly poor year. So price is all about price at the end of the day, and I think he's too short. So I'd say a lay of Sight on John and a back bet on Coneygree and possibly a wee saver on out.